what would be the logic of cutting back on days to vote when it proved that a lot more people could then vote? That had nothing to do with anything. And then when you deal with the ID question, there was no fraud, and people always had to have ID to register to vote. Why do we need new ID now when there was nothing wrong with the ID process that was already being used?
I think it actually goes back to that old cynical bumper sticker that a lot of people have seen that says, it says something like, if voting could change anything, they'd make it illegal. Well, voting can change things, and so they are actually trying to make it illegal. I'd even quibble with the previous was using, calling it an issue. You know, it's not really an issue. It's a scandal. You know, this is a concerted effort by one party to disenfranchise a vast block of voters. The president actually did put it pretty well when he said that that's not a platform. If your platform is to try to make it harder for people to vote, you're not offering very much to voters.
You know, Representative Reese, you were there Friday with all of us when the president hit Republicans for trying to attract voters, all while restricting the right to vote. Listen.
This recent effort to restrict the vote has not been led by both parties. It's been led by the Republican Party. And in fairness, it's not just Democrats who are concerned. You know, you had one Republican state legislator point out, and I'm quoting here, making it more difficult for people to vote is not a good sign for a party that wants to attract more people. If your strategy depends on having fewer people show up to vote, that's not a sign of strength. That's a sign of weakness.
To bring down the number of people voting, Representative Reese, is an anti-democratic strategy if that's what's behind it.
Well, voting is not a partisan issue. This is not a partisan issue. This is the new civil rights issue. And as President Obama said on Friday at the National Action Network, we were there, he talked about folks who marched so their children would have these opportunities. Well, we are the children now, and we're standing up, and that's what we're trying to do here in Ohio and take it across the country to fight for a voter bill of rights to put in the Constitution so that we can have some permanent rights. And one of the things President Obama said, it's up to everyday ordinary people, and that's what we're trying to do here in Ohio. Get petitions signed, put it on the ballot, let the people decide, and take partisanship out of this. This is the new civil rights movement of our time.
Now, Ryan, this weekend, right-wing speakers repeatedly claimed the new laws were not meant to disenfranchise voters. Take a listen.
And there are no examples of people being turned away like the president says.
Sure.
So his concern is purely speculative. This whole argument is a complete souffle. It's collapsing in on itself.
If voter ID were about voter disenfranchisement, why was African-American turnout so much greater in 2012? Yes. I mean, it has had zero effect on turnout.
I'd just like to show up at the White House and say, I'd just like to come in and look around. They say, you have an appointment? No, and I don't have a photo ID either, but I'd just like to come and look around. I figured if I can vote without one, I ought to be able to come in there and look around without one, too.
But these laws target groups, Ryan, that overwhelmingly back the president and Democrats in the last election. 93% of African Americans voted for Obama in the last election. So did 71% of Hispanics, 60% of young people. And what they're not talking about is there are requirements for ID. We had ID when we voted every election since John Kennedy through Reagan and all. Why do we need new ID when there has been no fraudulent use of the ID that we've already used to get registrations for voters?
They don't explain why. You know, they've more or less moved past the voter fraud argument because with several years worth of time to try to find examples, they were unable to find any. So they've kind of moved past. Now they're just talking about the integrity of the vote. But the arguments are remarkably similar to the ones you'd hear from spokespeople for a poll tax or a literacy test. They would say, look, we're not trying to stop any particular person from voting. In fact, anybody who pays their poll tax and who passes this literacy test can vote.
Right.
And what's wrong with that? The most informed citizens voting? Don't we want people who have a stake in their community voting? So, there are plenty of ways to dress up what they're doing in egalitarian terms. But what are the chances that every single policy that they would propose would hurt Democratic voters? If they were actually concerned about the integrity of the vote, you'd think that you know, by sheer chance of randomness, some of their proposals would hurt Republican voters, some would hurt Democratic voters, but that's not what we see. This is very tightly targeted on Democrats.
State Representative Alicia Reese and Ryan Grimm, thank you both for your time this evening.
Thank you.